We have seen DPM Wong in his speech saying, he wants to hear what our dreams are. He wants us to work the next chapter of Singapore together with him. And this seems a bit more of a consultative approach. And how much of this is actually consultative and how much is it performative? Because these discussions do happen amongst my friends. We ask, are they doing it for the sake of doing it? Are they actually genuinely concerned with what we are thinking about? And they're actually putting our voices in when they craft new policies, when they debate things in parliament and things like that.
It's better for Singapore's interest for multiple political parties to have a strong core of people who can govern the country, who have a strong core of ideas, who can bounce off these ideas with each other in the public sphere. And that's why I talk a lot about going beyond the partisan politicking. It's not really about, I'm PAP, therefore I whack you, or I'm opposition, therefore I whack you.
May 15, Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong will get a new title and a new job as Singapore's fourth Prime Minister. And along with that leadership transition comes talk of an impending general election. So I want to know what millennials and Gen Zs, essentially young voters, think about these recent matters. So today on the couch with me, I have three guests. First up, I have Joel, the host of the Political Prude podcast, and he also runs a digital media house, Straits Media. And you're no stranger to this setup with us. Thank you for coming back.
Thanks for having me. I'm always excited to be speaking with you.
And next to you is Carissa, and she's the Chief Strategy Officer of a tech company, and she's also a career counsellor. Hi, Carissa.
Hello, yes.
All right,
That was
and
so slay.
the third guest on our show is Gautham. Hi, Gautham. You are a final year student at NUS and you are studying.
I major in biomedical engineering and I'm from NUS College.
Oh,
Yes.
welcome, guys.
Thanks
Oh,
for
sorry,
having
NTU.
us. Yeah.
Okay, I'm flexing your school now. All right. Okay, but that's not what we are. It's not school pride day
okay.
today. Okay, so I just want to ask, are you guys excited about May 15?
Woo! I really hope it's going to be declared a public holiday. I think we all need it and we should celebrate such an
Very
important
that.
day for Singapore.
Very that.
I'm going to say it's a no, but DPM Wong, if you're listening, grant some wishes maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
Yes, yeah.
It will be all
People will be
because of
very
you.
happy.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, since it's Thursday and we're filming on Thursday, I want to do a little bit of a throwback. What were you guys doing in 2004 when the last leadership transition happened where PM Lee became PM Lee? So I was in JC and I was trying to survive that, so it doesn't register at all.
I was in
but-
primary 3. That was before I became aware of such things.
Right. 2004.
Yeah, what were you?
How old
Gautham,
was
you
I?
were
I was
like
in primary
6.
school.
I was primary 1, I think.
I was in primary school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did the math. Like you were a kid.
Yeah, I was young. I was probably trying to ask my mom to buy me sweets from the mama shop downstairs.
So
I
that
hope it's still in business.
Yeah, it is.
that moment didn't really stick with you guys. So is this upcoming one on May 15th, when DPM Wong becomes PM Wong, what does that mean for you guys?
I feel like this is probably the first conscious transition that I've had. I don't really remember it being a discussion back when we were kids, so...
I think a part of it is that if you compare the other leadership transitions that Singapore has had, and it's not like we've had a lot of them, but this is the one that has been the most iterative, has been the most, you have seen it unfold in real time now over the past few years.
Yeah. Gautham, you were going to say?
No, I just think that, actually personally, I felt that we were aware that, DPM Wong is eventually going to be Prime Minister. It's just a matter of when. But it might have been an accelerated timeline that people were expecting. Maybe it was too fast. Some people say it's just nice. And it's not something new to all of us, but yet we want to hopefully celebrate this. And we're all looking forward to what DPM Wong has for Singapore.
I think PM Lee is thinking, couldn't have come sooner. He's the most excited.
All right. So an interesting, I saw a couple of numbers that came out yesterday by YouGov. So it's like a survey thing that they did, and then they did it after the handover announcement. And interesting number that I wanted to pull out was that 38% of Singaporeans have a lot of expectations of DPM Wong. And I was like, what does that mean? So I'm going to ask you guys, what kind of qualities are you looking for in Singapore's next Prime Minister?
Good question.
I mean, for me, I've always just said that, when we look at our leader, I think we just want someone that can represent the country well, someone that also listens to the people, and just is a good person. I think it's as simple as that,
What's your gauge of a good person?
Vibes,
Okay. Does he
vibes.
pass the vibe check?
Babes, passing with flying colors.
All right.
What's going on?
I would say that a lot of it comes down to understanding, especially when we look at the current local, regional, and international climate, understanding like Singapore's place in the world and really trying to figure out like three fundamental facts about Singapore. We are a small country. We have a very high population density. And I think compared to most other countries, like especially larger states like Russia or China or America or India, for example, we are a lot more governable because of our small size and our high population density. Those three fundamental facts define a lot of how to approach Singapore's governance and how to approach the next, the next lap. That I think this is something that DPM, soon to be PM Wong, is going to have to think a lot about. And I hope that he doesn't get too many sleepless nights the same way our generation does, because it is quite a volatile road ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I need to clap. What an answer.
You scared me. I thought you were going to cut this.
Okay.
But like that was enough. But Gautham, what are you hoping to see from?
So I can actually see why the figure 38%, they say that they have a lot of expectations for DPM Wong. For instance, a lot of this term always appear a lot around with youth. Around my age group, I want to say youth, but I get goosebumps. It's top down, we have seen Forward SG. We have seen DPM Wong in his speech saying, he wants to hear what our dreams are. He wants us to work the next chapter of Singapore together with him. And this seems a bit more of a consultative approach. And how much of this is actually consultative and how much is it performative? Because these discussions do happen amongst my friends. We ask, are they doing it for the sake of doing it? Are they actually genuinely concerned with what we are thinking about? And they're actually putting our voices in when they craft new policies, when they debate things in parliament and things like that. So I think that would have been a good reason why they say youth are having more expectations on DPM.
I'll actually very briefly jump in because I really love the point that you brought up about the whole top-down perception thing. Because, and I think, especially if you look at the past few years in Singapore, there has been a pattern where I guess like a lot of decision-making has on several occasions been very much like we decide certain things behind closed doors and then we make the decision already, then we announce to you kind of thing. That's why there's this whole no more top-down thing a few years ago, for example. And I think that a lot of what we think about, because I think now we talk about forward Singapore, right? What is the future? What does forward mean? Where are we going to, right? And this actually brings me to my point, which is that I think Singapore, we have this whole thing where I think, I'm not so sure if during PM Lee's term it's talked about as much, but during the previous generation, especially Goh Chok Tong's time, Lee Kuan Yew's time, there's this whole 5 C's thing that everyone talks about the whole aspirations that we have. I want to propose a different one. I think what we have is what I call 5 F's instead, right? Whereby we have to really think about what are, I guess, fit for purpose futures. Like what kind of futures are fit for purpose? Which are the futures where we live? Which are the futures where we don't die? Which are the futures where each of us has a place in this future? Which are the futures which belong to us and where we belong to these futures? Right. So that's a fundamental question we have to think about. And that requires that process to be one that's very participatory, one that is very, I guess, inclusive, very iterative, and not one that is like top down, for example. So I think that's definitely a very good point that was brought up.
Okay, so I mean, you definitely put a lot of thought into the
I think a lot of people in our
Yes,
generation have to put a lot of thought because it is our rice bowls after all.
Which makes me kind of like embarrassed to ask the next question, because I was going to say like DPM Wong is actually one of the more prolific ministers on social media. I wanted to bring it down to the everyday connection
which is quite
us.
important actually.
Yeah, so I think he's one of the ministers who actually... Okay, to me, it's sometimes a hit and miss with the content, but I want to find out what do you guys like about it. Does this appeal to our generation or even Gen Zs? Is this how you want to connect with him?
I think when we look at social media, the way, the lens we can look at it is kind of like, you say hit or miss, right? But a hit to you could be a miss to someone.
Exactly.
And a miss for you could be a hit for someone else.
Exactly.
So your mileage may vary thing.
Yeah. So I actually think that, the whole approach of like just trying out different content types or different formats of content is actually great. And I think that you are right. Like, he's one of the few ministers who have actually played the social media game really, really well.
Yeah.
He has lighthearted content. You see him doing trends. You see him like going viral with Q&As, doing like guitar sessions with Taylor Swift songs. And then at the same time, you see him talking about like his work, as DPM, as finance minister, summarizing perhaps some of the announcements that he makes. So I do think that mix is actually a good mix, because, you can kind of see a more lighthearted side to him, which I think a lot of young people want also. We don't really like the, straight-laced.
Yeah. So he kind of gives you like an insider view of how he will be as prime minister eventually.
And I think the social media age is all about like being human, just like understanding that you are also a person, right? And I think that connects people to him. Yeah.
Okay. Gautham,
I think
Gen Z?
I think Joel summed it up really beautifully. But one issue that I had with not really issue, but something that I do is cringe a bit. Like he said, it's a hit or miss.
Yeah.
Or, you said hit or miss. But then when you actually see it, at first, for example, Minister Ong, when he did the Taylor Swift "You Belong With Me" TikTok or Instagram reel, I think. It was fantastic because I'm a Swiftie. I love that. And then when I saw it being used as a case study in class, then I realized actually it can be a bit of cringe. So it's
what class is this?
This was one of the modules that I was taking at NUS, and we were using this as a case study to show how social media is being used by politicians, ministers around the world, and Singapore was a case study. And it's very funny because at first you don't think about it as much. Like, actually you feel like, your minister's actually connecting to you, but then you realize that, I'm now interested in politics. And then you see that, okay, this is a way that, PAP or even any kind of political party can use social media as a tool to, pull in people or at least expose the different things that they do. And it can actually shift, I think personally can shift things, especially in the upcoming elections.
Yeah.
My perspective on this is, and this really brought to mind a recent article, I think, about the one where I think Minister Shanmugam rebutted on them about the Economist article that referred to Lawrence Wong as a relative unknown or something, which I found very surprising, because I'm like, in Singapore, I think when you are in a position where before people remember Lawrence Wong as DPM or even finance minister, Lawrence Wong was heading the COVID-19 Interministerial Committee. Everyone knew him. Everyone saw him on TV all the time, right? It's always like, is that circuit breaker extending or phase 1, phase 2, all this thing, all the lockdown restrictions, whatever. So everyone remembers him. But when you're in that position, there's a lot of scrutiny that comes to that. You need to have some control over your own narrative. And that's where the social media part comes in, right? But of course, social media is like, it's a tool. It's an instrument. At the end of the day, it's a means to an end. But is it fit for purpose? And which social media is fit for what kind of purpose?
A lot of pundits have been saying that 2024 GE is likely, but actually, can I say, guys, they have until November 2025 to call it, right? So it could be any time. I wanted to ask you what each of you will be looking out for when election season starts, and just very quickly, just tell me what you guys are thinking about. Gautham?
For me personally, when I think about the next GE, what I'm actually focusing on is the fact that we have the 4G leaders now. And there are specific ministers in our current cabinet who have been there for a very long time. And it's going to be interesting with the next general election, the next cabinet reshuffle, who is going to be the next minister for these specific portfolios. And for example, Minister of Law, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Home Affairs, are they going to be the same people or are they going to be different? And these are crucial things for me as a youth. I'm thinking about it because you keep saying we want the next generation of leaders to come up. But then are we going to see someone new there in these portfolios? I mean, I'm pretty sure minister, they have a big role in deciding all these things. And beyond that, it goes back to the same point I mentioned just now. Are we going to see more performance, or is there genuine concern where they actually consult us to hear our voices, and especially the voices of specific issues that may not be based on livelihood? It might be things on for example, our housing rights, or
which is a matter of livelihood.
Are we going to still continue having conversations on what a traditional family is?
You need more than a very small space to live in.
So these are all the small little things that I look out for personally, and I'm pretty sure my group of friends will also look out for these too. Yeah.
Okay, Carissa, one thing that you'll be looking out during the election season.
5 Fs, as I mentioned earlier. But
okay,
I think
you gotta summarize it. in
Well, I
five
guess
Fs?
5 F's basically, I'm just going to state it that basically the first two things is really thinking about, I mentioned about fit for purpose futures, knowing whether the futures that we choose are actually fit for purpose, are actually tailored to the needs of our population. And of course, what I mentioned here, flexibility for the many, that ties to the whole top-down thing, because I think in terms of job security, I think job security is a very important thing, because these days, a lot of times, the emphasis seems to be on this whole notion of labor market flexibility. It gets elevated to some kind of dogma even. But the question is flexibility for whom? Is it flexibility for your employers, or is it flexibility for your workers, flexibility for your precarious working class folks, right? So flexibility for the many at the end of the day is how do we ensure that the kind of reforms we put in place, economic and social reforms we put in place, are meant so that ordinary working Singaporeans and job-seeking Singaporeans are able to actually have that flexibility. Then of course the next two Fs, I talk about them in terms of the threats, that national security threats that face Singapore, especially talk about far-right extremism, religious fundamentalism, talk about foreign interference. And it's not actually so clear-cut as the kind of like one or two public instances that you see like, FICA being used against, or you have like specific individuals that are like, I don't know, dismissed or something. You've got a lot more people than that. And I think countries are realistic about that. The question is, are we able to actually recognize that and stand up to it even in a more geopolitically complex climate, which then brings to the final one, which I think is the overarching perspective I have. Because I think every country that we see in the world today, right, every country has to face this thing that economics called the guns versus butter problem, right? Because in order to live, you need to be able to feed yourself. But in order to be able to continue to feed yourself uninterrupted, you need to be able to defend yourself. So you have both political economy, national security, right? Guns and butter. But of course, it's not every day that every society gets this balance correct, right? So you have problems that are bound to happen. This is just part and parcel of governance. No country is perfect. No government is perfect. The question then is, when you have inconvenient problems that arise, when you have problems that may be embarrassing, that may be humiliating to the people who run the countries, who run the governments, are they able to fix the problems that are underlying these things? Or do they resort to the easier alternative of fixing up the people who raise these problems, who bring these problems to attention, because it is an easier way of just making the problem go away? So I think how we navigate this balance, and how DPM Lawrence Wong and his team and all the other teams, by the way, in Singapore, because Singapore is not just made of one group of ruling people. At the end of the day, when we look at a general election, you're electing the next government. You need talent in every bench, in every rank, across all the different political parties, and pass a point across every sector as well. Do we have that? Do we have this national understanding, this national consensus that these are things that we actually have to come together to address together? That that goes beyond partisan politicking, that goes beyond basically taking cheap pot shots at each other. I think that's something we have to be very clear about. And once we get these fundamentals right, I think I'm confident Singapore can survive for a very long time to come.
Carissa, thank you so much for being super detailed. I know, right? I was like, all right. Wow, thank you so much for putting thought into that question. And I think I have some points that we'll touch on that in down this conversation, but I just want to hear from Joel quickly about what
they covered quite a bit. So for me,
still the answer. It's like
I want to copy them.
Yeah.
But for me, with elections, right, I'm always looking forward to the memes.
Oh, yes, my answer.
Yes.
It's always
the
I'm so excited about the memes.
For me, with all the elections, there's always this sentiment that, hey, it's always the lead up that is more important. You see the work that people do. You understand, the manifestos and whatnot. But at the same time, I do think there's a huge part of it, which is the campaigning. And that's where we kind of see whether or not people slip up a little bit.
Yeah.
There will be social media moments, and then you can
warm
see
the cockles of our heart.
and then you can see people just react to it. I feel like that's so special actually, and
it's a very Singaporean thing.
It is,
right?
it is,
Yeah.
and just having that be communicated and having people have fun with an election like that just makes it I always look forward to that every election now. Yeah.
But that's very funny because I was asking you what is your main concern when you listen to your politicians talk and you are like, I need content. No, but is it cost of living for you what will affect you when you go to the ballot box?
Right. Yeah. I think it's just when it comes to that, it's really whether or not they hear what young people are concerned about.
What are young people concerned about?
I mean, with Forward SG, we hear things like, inclusivity, things like mental health support. And I think with Forward SG, I was just listening here and there. We realized that with mental health, there is now such a wide spectrum of people's understanding of mental health. I think people who are very passionate about it are already at certain levels. Whereas there's a huge number of people who don't even want to discuss it, you know.
Yeah.
So we've come to that point where, you know, at first it was all about like just getting people to be familiar with the topic, but now, you know, there's such a wide variety of people, like different levels of understanding, and then that becomes a challenge on its own, right? The next phase of how we tackle this mental health issue, to me, that's something that I care a lot about.
So do you guys think like for your age group, Gen Zs and millennials, will bread and butter issues take a backseat versus these concerns such as, you know, perhaps like climate change or mental health issues, like how they campaign about it, or even say geopolitical issues, what Singapore's stance is on it, or concerns about civil
I want to
liberty?
just quickly chip in on this.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a dichotomy, at least from my perspective, because things like geopolitical issues, things like climate change, things like mental health and all these things, they are bread and butter issues. They are material conditions. They are things that affect the day-to-day livelihoods of our people, of our communities, especially more communities on the margins, precarious communities, right? And I think Singapore, at the end of the day, the Singapore story is the story of a precarious set of people who have somehow found our way to, I guess, build out of it. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of different precarities that exist.
Actually, personally speaking, I would see a very good mix of these two issues. If I just go on Instagram right now, I would probably see someone complaining about their BTO application failing. And the next story will be someone who is advocating for a specific global issue, geopolitical tensions. And then next issue would be about someone speaking up for the rights of nurses, more welfare for the nurses in Singapore, and it goes back to, you know, someone who is actually talking about housing again. So I actually have seen a very good balance of at least in my social circle, talking about these two issues, and I actually foresee that there'll be a very good mix and a very good tension between these two, and it's going to be a very big challenge to all our parties competing for the elections, and I'm actually looking forward to it and how they're going to respond, because they are going to be under immense pressure. We are in a new economy. The world is really crazy right now, and you know, we also have issues back at home that we have to tackle. Up until COVID, we didn't have data on rough sleepers in Singapore, and there's so many issues that are happening in Singapore as well, while we are also in a global scale, and we are also having issues all around the world. And how are we going to balance all this? I think we're going to see a very good mix of these people being concerned one over another.
Yeah.
I think
so
that's what I think.
I wanted to ask, you guys have like a lot of concerns. I don't know whether people watching will be like, okay, they have a lot to say. But I wanted to ask, do you think you are more difficult? Not you. I'm also part of this group. I don't know whether you. It's a Gen Z. We. Do you think we, Gen Zs and millennials, are more difficult to convince than the older voter? Do they have to show up more?
I don't know what more difficult to convince actually means in this context.
I mean, like, are you harder to convince? Like, do they need to give you a stronger argument as opposed to saying?
I think every generation understands our material needs. I think every generation understands that these things, be it the so-called daily, like bread and butter issues, or the supposed other issues, which again, I emphasize they are interconnected. And to me, the litmus test for whether any political party will do well at the polls, be it 2024, 2025, or later down the line, depends on whether they recognize these two are interconnected and they're able to bring them together, domestic and international, so-called bread and butter and everything else, because they are all ultimately tied together. And I think if they are able to see how they reinforce each other as a system, as a kind of like, you know, processes and all these things, then ordinary voters of any demographic will understand. But at the end of the day, you've got to think about the question of intergenerational equity as well. Because I think at the end of the day, the fundamental question, be it if you're in your 60s or 70s or in your 20s or whatever it is, or in your 40s, every generation is going to ask this question, am I getting a fair shake in Singapore? Am I getting a fair deal in Singapore? Or do we deserve better?
Gautham, your take?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add on. I actually wanted to say that, we were talking about the generation and whether we are harder to convince. Actually, I don't think we're harder to convince, but there's actually a barrier, you see, because I feel that with technology, with algorithms, with AI, with social media, there's so many opportunities for misinformation.
Yeah.
And any other social media or WhatsApp article can spread misinformation about someone's campaign. And then when that happens, there's going to be like a whole issue, or this thing blows up, and it can be fake news half the time, and we don't know. And because there's fake news going around, and we have to also issue correction. We have to make sure that our citizens are voting, are informed voters. There is that to tackle as well. So I think it wouldn't say we're hard to convince, but there are more challenges.
It's an epistemic crisis we're looking at, lah.
Yeah.
Joel, are you harder to convince?
So actually answering this question and the one before, I've actually met a lot of people who come up to me, in person and say, actually, I don't really care about politics, but then the content that you do or like the podcast made me interested in politics and just like care a little bit more. And then obviously then I'll be like, okay, I ask the same questions, right? Like, what are you like looking out for? What do you care about when you go and vote, And what I've realized is that we don't give enough credit to the roles that the members of parliament play as the MPs of constituencies.
Yes.
So a lot of people have said that, hey, I'm actually going to vote for them because I see them being very active with the community. I see the efficiency in having the light bulbs replaced when I complain about them, in the void decks being cleaned, and it. Like the first one or two, I was like, okay, this is interesting, because it's always nice to hear different people's perspectives, right? Like, obviously, I think we all belong to a certain category of people, but not all our people care also, and for them, after the maybe like fourth or fifth, then I'm like, hey, actually, we tend to forget that there's kind of like a dual role, right? That like you can have portfolios and whatnot, but also a lot of them have to like run like the constituents.
And I think I want to build on that briefly, because you brought up the thing about the light bulb stuff, and the joke like how many MPs does it take to change a light bulb? But at the end of the day, I think because these are also political issues. These are not separate
your
from the rest
everyday
of the
issues that
you talk
we
about.
might not know
at the end of the day,
care about, right?
Residents are paying conservancy fees, SNCC fees for their town councils. If their town councils are not doing a good job, that's also political. This is your money after all. It's not like you're making a lot in a paycheck, right? So that's a question that I think it may sound like it's very mundane to some people, but I think it is very much political, because that is part of your disposable income you're paying, and you don't get a choice to say whether you want to pay or not. Or you can see what happens if you try it. And also, I think there's a lot of things that like these. And I think Singapore, that goes back to what I say about Singapore's three fundamental facts, right? We're small, we have a high population density, we are highly governable, right? In Singapore, you get one HDB block, 200 plus residents, right? Or something like that. What happens if you're able to actually make decisions at that level? What happens if you're able to... I think Singapore is one of the few countries where we could implement actual participatory town councils that would be quite a transformative institution for governance in Singapore, that would be fit for purpose to our conditions, and that in a way that I think many other countries will not be able to do. Because you think about it, even going back to the whole municipal stuff, right? Singapore's one of the few countries where we have this whole concept of the meet the people sessions. Because that was pioneered way back, David Marshall, when he was chief minister. He put that precedent in place. Now every political party does it as well, ever since then, right? This is not a natural thing that happens everywhere else you go, right? You don't see this in other countries, right? Singapore, we do have that. How do we take one step further from here? How do we really think about that relationship between residents and members of parliament, and how do we involve the residents directly in that governance process? I think that will determine a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when it comes to meet the people sessions, right, I think that actually ranks quite highly, because that's the residents' direct interaction with their MPs.
Yes.
And a lot of the times, even when Taman was running for president, a lot of them came forward to say like, when I met him, he helped me do this.
From that way,
So we can see how that actually can affect people's perspectives of like who they want to support.
Yes. Okay. So during election season, one of the questions, well, not questions, but one of the issues that will come out is that we need diverse voices in parliament, right? And there's a need for check and balances.
Yes.
Which is why we need an opposition in parliament. What do you think about this argument? Does it still work today, Gautham?
I don't know. Whenever I hear the word diverse, diversity, diverse views, are we talking about just having different insights and different opinions about things in parliament? Are we talking about the background of the individual who's represented as an MP in cabinet? in the parliament, so for example, I know what race are you, what's the socioeconomic background, what's your religion, what's your sexual orientation, and all these things play a big part in an opinion and a view that you hold, and it's representative of a specific group and community in Singapore. So I will always be for having differing views in parliament, because it's important that many of our views are represented. Just for example, recently the TikTok thing blew up, when
Which one?
the TikTok CEO was, questioned in Senate.
Oh, I see.
And I took a moment, I laughed when I watched the videos. I kept questioning, why are they asking such questions? And then I realized many citizens in US could have actually thought the same way they were thinking. And it's important for these questions to be raised in such a public platform, because there will be citizens who are also asking this question, and this is one way they're being represented. And it's the same thing in Singapore's context. I feel that's when the ruling party is questioned for policies and their questions for things moving forward, many of our views and our concerns are also being addressed, and especially the minority groups. Yeah, I think that's why I really support opposing views in parliament. Not necessarily you have to be from the opposition party. You can be from the same party as well. You can have differing views. I think it's very healthy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I agree, 100%. I just feel like it's more important that we have representation, and actually, I retweet, just want to retweet. Does retweet still exist?
Who are you retweeting? Okay,
Not retweet, some quote tweet.
Quote tweet. Like slay.
Yeah. Okay. Which part?
I don't use
the whole
The
thing.
whole
Okay,
thing.
the whole thing.
But
Okay.
representation is so important though. I do agree that when you have different voices, different backgrounds, different opinions coming out in parliament, at least you can feel that that's they're being inclusive, and also they're giving thought behind all the different policies that come up, so and that the policies that are coming forward, they're at least addressing what different groups, how different groups will be affected or impacted by them, which I think is very important.
Yeah.
Well, I think that at the end of the day, I keep going back to this, Singapore doesn't just have one quote-unquote A team, as some people might say, right? I think you need the next generation of leadership in every political party. And of course, I think a lot of times people just look at it as this ruling party, opposition parties. I don't think it's so clear-cut. I don't think it's a dichotomy, actually. And I've been saying this since 2015, actually. Because I think 2015 GE, everyone talked about. 2011 and 2015, everyone keeps talking about, is this the new normal? Or has a new normal suddenly gone away? Or is it just an aberration? Is it just an exception, right? I think what we really see right now, the biggest change right now we see is that you have a new generation of people, both in the ruling party, as well as in the more credible opposition parties that I think are building a core for the next leadership in Singapore. And I think across the board, you're going to need that. It's better for Singapore's interests for multiple political parties to have a strong core of people who can govern the country, who have a strong core of ideas, who can bounce off these ideas with each other in the public sphere. And that's why I talk a lot about going beyond the partisan politicking. It's not really about, I'm PAP, therefore I whack you, or I'm opposition, therefore I whack you. It's about, be PAP, WP, SDP, PSP, all these different things. You've got good ideas across the board. You've got good people across the board. Bring them together.
Yeah.
Govern the country together. Govern the country with our Singaporean citizens, with our Singaporean population, with our working classes, with our ordinary people. That's how we move forward, Singapore.
Okay. Another thing that might come up during the election season are the scandals.
Of course.
Last year was giving a lot. I was like, what is happening?
Better than the memes.
Better than the memes.
The memes that came out of that.
It's bringing the Matrix into the light.
Okay, well, will that factor into how you guys vote? Or, do you want to see more being addressed? Because a lot was talked about last year, but when it comes to election and we go into campaign season, how do you think the scandals will factor in? Because it was across, I just want to caveat, it was across both sides. It wasn't just one party per se. Yeah.
Yes,
Your thoughts,
definitely.
yeah.
I think it definitely will be brought up, and it will definitely be one part of the entire election period. But
Do you, sorry to cut in, but do you want to hear about it again?
Okay,
Yeah.
the truth is I'm very tired already.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, can we move on?
Yeah.
But more importantly, I think it's just more so like, I want to hear maybe plans to see like, how can we avoid this kind of, as much as it was entertaining, as much as it was, like, ooh, scandalous tea at the period. I think by the end of that week, right, everybody was kind of just like, wait, this isn't Singapore. We don't like this actually. Like it was funny. It was like, like entertaining for some of us.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like when it comes to government, I don't think we want that, you know? So I think the more important thing is just it's more so like how can we make sure that like things like this just don't happen again, you know?
Gautham,
I
agree?
I completely agree. Honestly, the whole thing happened beyond the mini entertainment that I had during my summer holidays was actually me thinking, at the end of the day, our MPs, our leaders of society, they are all humans and we're all going to make mistakes. And what is more important to me and even my group of friends is how do they deal with that
you adjust the
situation
mistakes.
and how are they going to rectify this and how are they going to come out of it, which is why it's very important. Like if I'm going to look at the elections, I'm going to think about, okay, what are they going to say about like what Joel said, how are we going to move forward from here?
Yeah.
Are we going to come implement new measures of how we're assessing our next leaders of Singapore? And beyond that, I think personally, maybe I'm a very simple person. I think owning up to it, apologizing and removing yourself from the situation is
It's like good for you.
It's
You're
good for
like-
me.
Another thing that will be a big thing during election season is social media, because at the 2020 election, it was COVID and then everybody had to tap on it. There was no choice, right? You had to tap social media to connect. Do you think this upcoming election, when it happens, social media will change the game again? Your take, Joel, since you're
Right.
always on social media. Yes.
I mean, there's definitely the idea that social media will play a heavy role in the election. I mean, with the presidential election and the previous GE, we already see how useful social media can be when it comes to communicating who you are and what you stand for. But at the same time, I think we have the case study of Kok Song from the presidential elections, who did run a pure digital campaign, right? And that didn't necessarily translate into votes. So I don't think we can just go and say like, okay, social media is everything, right? It's just going to be one part of it. At the same time, you cannot ignore social media. In fact, I think that like this time around, and I think Carissa alluded to it earlier as well, there's so many different ways to communicate on social media. It cannot be as simple as like, I have one video and I'm going to post it on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook.
They got to
And
know
then-
the platforms. And their
so
appeals.
it's I think how we look at social media is just more so how are they going to use each platform and how they're going to tweak their content to basically communicate to the audiences of those platforms.
Okay.
I
Carissa?
think at the end of the day, it's about social media is a ways and means question, but there are ends at the end of the day. And it's about going back to both the question about what the so-called political scandals as well as the use of social media. It's about cutting through the signal and the noise. It's about looking for what the signal is. Take, for example, if you talk about, say, some of the scandals, right, be it the corruption cases or be it the case of like the certain utterance in parliament, for example, right? The signal, the noise is this is very entertaining, this is very, like, wow, such a scandalous thing. But the signal underneath it is, what does that reveal about the underlying attitudes? What does that reveal about the underlying dispositions of the people who run this country? How do we shift that in a way that is constructive for Singapore? Right? That's the signal. And social media is a means to convey to your voters, you understand the signal, you're not caught up in the noise. Because if you're caught up in the noise, I think voters can tell a phony very, very quickly.
I honestly wouldn't put it past them that social media might not be everyone's focus actually, because at the end of the day, it's what we see, what we hear, what we feel. And many a times, when we're driving the roads, we'll see our posters of our parties on the streets to vote for them. When we go for the rallies and we hear them talk, and everything will play a big part, and social media might only capture a specific demographic of the voters, and we should never
It's an
forget about
instrument at the end of
our
the
older
day.
generation who probably might not even be
Yeah.
using TikTok or Facebook or Instagram as well.
I mean, like when I keep going back to presidential election,
Yeah.
but then
Because it just happened. It's still fresh. It's like,
You've done a lot of work there.
Like, I mean, with President Taman's campaign, like he only joined Instagram like very late.
when he was
like,
announcing it, I think. And then, around that time, I think. Yeah.
And then, as we all know, like, when building social media following, it takes time, right? So it's not like as if you can come on and with like, like thousands of followers that he can already just start talking to. So I do think that like, he's right. Like the on ground and other ways to communicate with voters is also very, very, very important. Not just social media.
Yeah.
I think that a good social media game follows from a good ground game. And if you talk about President Tharman, for example, he has had an impressive ground game in Taman Jurong and nationally across and internationally even, I think. That is why during the campaign you have people who and I think there's something that needs to be emphasized, right? Because Tharman's historic landslide victory during the presidential elections is not a representation of any ruling party related thing. He
It was
won
a
on
him,
his
right?
own
Was
merits.
his Tharman
He brought
effect,
together
right?
a wide coalition of people, including people who are not necessarily with the ruling party. And he brought together people who are otherwise not necessarily engaged in politics. Right? So you have these things whereby I think when you've got a good ground game on the like in wherever your constituency is, and constituency is not just your geographical constituency, it's any other kind of constituency as well. That follows from there, good people will step up, because I do think we have a very good bench of people across the board in all our constituencies, ordinary folks, not necessarily your visible types, ordinary folks in our communities who are doing great work with like just supporting the people around them, mutual aid and stuff, like just looking after people, making sure people survive, exchanging things, all that. Those people make Singapore run. And Tharman, someone like President Tharman, has, when you've cultivated those relationships at that level, those people will show up for you.
Right.
And when those people show up for you, they mobilize their people, you get an excellent result. And if the result is good, thumbs up. That's what they say, So same thing.
And I think that answers the question I was going to ask you about how do you want politicians on both sides to actually connect with you. It's not just on social media where, so if some politician's going to be like, okay, I'm going to win it on social media, that might not always be 100% strategy, right?
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's not.
But actually, on a personal level, I think it's very important that they, like at least during the election period, like they make those information available on their socials, because that's naturally the first place I'll go to.
Right.
And I think that more and more voters, especially young voters, are interested to know like what they stand for, their manifesto, things like that. So if they are able to just communicate that and pin them to the top, I think that would be very important also. Yeah.
All right. I mean, we've spoken about social media, we've spoken about politicians and the strategy. How do you think mainstream news media should actually cover the elections and the forthcoming political events, actually, in terms of what do young voters want to know from mainstream media or see in mainstream media, actually?
I actually would really appreciate during the elections period for the mainstream media to kind of have like a fact checker. Because I mean, we talked about
As in fact check who exactly? Just
okay,
to be clear.
Across the board.
Across because we talked about how misinformation spreads, right? And I think that it's very dangerous.
Right.
If it's just someone with whatever just like puts out like different like information that is like circulating maybe on
Alternative facts.
on IG or on WhatsApp, right? And I and internally among friends is when we receive something, we're like, hey, is this real or not? And then we don't really like, you have to like go and find different sources and then like do your own ways of fact checking.
Okay.
I think that like a very fast turnaround of like, okay, like this is not
What they
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, like maybe like actually the new not new lah, but like on Twitter or X, the community notes, right, where people talk about like, actually this is not true. I really appreciate things like
when
that,
people like
because
step into
because
okay.
the barrier to entry to like voice out anything, fake news, whatever, it's just so easy. You can just put it out there,
Also, one good example to learn from when it comes to combating disinformation and fake news, Taiwan, because they have their own system there. I mean, of course, society there's a lot more complex as well, but they have a dedicated digital ministry that's looking into that, and I think they have come up with some very innovative approaches to like crowdsource this kind of like fact checking things, which makes it a lot more nimble than what we have right now. I am saying we need to evolve towards having more community fact checking, having more ground up fact checking that helps us cut through that thing in a way that doesn't end up being perceived as just another instrument of we're just silencing voices we don't like.
Right. Gautham?
I completely agree. I feel that we should, have a balanced view. Like one thing I would like is a balanced view. I mean, it's always very hard to have a, bias. Like biasness comes in somehow, one form or another. When writing an article, when shooting a video, like right now, even if I'm sitting down, I might have a bias towards someone or some party. But at the end of the day, I just don't want my mom or my dad to be reading fake news. I think I get
Right.
very
Yeah,
angry because I
yes.
have to go and scold them. I'm like, no.
Are they sending it
Are they
around?
actually like, no, they're not.
Okay.
Because that's why I like it. You know, when we have a family conversation,
Right.
we actually discuss, and then me and my siblings, sometimes we fact check with one another. We fact check with my
Yes.
parents, and this is healthy behavior. And beyond that, exactly like what she said. When we see the news, or when we see mainstream media being used to portray who's winning, who's ahead, I wouldn't want my generation of youth to be thinking about that. I would like them to think, even for myself, is what is the implication? What would happen if, for example, Holland Bukit Timah, what would happen if PAP loses that seat? Does it mean anything for the entire cabinet?
Yeah.
So these are critical questions that will actually affect different policies going forward as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's also something that I would hope our youth will get to do in the upcoming elections. Yeah.
Okay. I hear you.
Yeah.
And so we'll work on it. And coming from a mainstream media vocation, I hear you.
And
No,
wish you
but I
all the
just want to
best.
say
It's a
that
challenging
like
vocation.
a lot of people don't really think about the journalists
Yes.
that do the work for
Yes.
elections. I mean, I got to see how hard you guys.
Election
It's
journalism
oh
is
my
challenging.
God,
Yes.
big slaves.
Yes.
Honestly,
Correct.
like. And you know, the presidential, I'm going off track, but the presidential elections, a lot of people came up to me and they were like, oh, you know, you work so hard, you came out with so many episodes. And I'm like, no, like, have you seen the journalists who have to follow these candidates everywhere the entire day and then churn out articles
Yeah.
like at night? I'm like,
It was hard, guys.
it was not easy.
I
So
read
if
your
you're-
articles. Yeah.
Yeah,
I read
so-
your articles too.
I followed both your work.
So for the listeners, I think, you know, let's give a little thumbs up
Yes.
to our
All
journalists.
right.
Yeah.
That's so kind. Okay, one line, my last question. I just need a quick summary from you. What do you want your peers to know about or keep up with as the next GE looms?
Every vote matters. Be an informed voter.
Very nice.
You can
Joel,
go first. Think about it.
re-quoting that?
I feel like I'm recording you the whole frick. Oh, what? I almost
It
made
happened.
I almost made it. Yeah, I feel like we're recording you the whole podcast. But same thing. I think just be informed. Make sure that you learn about who you're voting for and what you're voting for. Yeah.
Well, I would say this: the issues that DPM Wong and his team have to worry about a lot at night if they have the chance to sleep at all, are the issues that our generation gets sleepless nights over. We need to pay very close attention to, are these things addressed? And going back to what I said, fixing problems rather than fixing up people. Right? If we are able to address these problems, then by the time our generation has to run this country, has to bring this country forward, we are not the ones having to headache and go, sian lah, we have to deal with this, we have to clean this up, Because I can tell you, if you look at both the PAP and the opposition, nobody really, it's not an enviable job to run Singapore. Singapore is not exactly the easiest country in the world to govern, although then again, most countries aren't. But this is going to be our responsibility by the time it hits us, because even DPM Wong or whoever his team is, they're not going to be there forever. Right? At some point, it's going to come to our generation. At some point, it's going to come to the generation after us, the Gen Alpha people as well. Right? What kind of Singapore, what kind of world, what kind of Southeast Asia are we leaving behind for them? That's the question we want to think about.
Thank you very much for your in-depth answers and very well thought out answers
For them.
and discussions. Were you two
All of
lads?
us.
Were you two?
All of us,
I
yes.
really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah. And on that note, if you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes of The Usual Place, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell down below. And if you want to hear the audio version of this episode, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or on the ST app. And if you have thoughts about this episode, or if you want to tell me what else you want to see on The Usual Place, you can connect with me on Instagram. I am at @theusualplace_nat. Follow me and drop me a DM, and I promise I will reply. Look out for more episodes at The Usual Place, and I'll see you again. Bye.